Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Mountain Mindset. My name is Andrei Mandzuk. I'm a mental performance coach, professor of sports science, and the founder of Mzk Performance. This week, I'm joined by Natalie Allport. Natalie's a former Team Canada snowboarder and lifelong entrepreneur. During our conversation, Natalie offers multiple strategies that we can all use to help build a growth mindset and speaks candidly about the mental health challenges faced when transitioning in and out of high-performance athletics. I'm really excited to share Natalie's insights with you and believe they have application for all of us, be that on the ski hill or in the boardroom. On that note, let's dive into our conversation. Natalie, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
So to start us off here, could you tell us a little bit about your journey so far and where that leaves you today?
Yeah. So, the quick notes on it is that I'm a former national team snowboarder. I spent my childhood outside playing sports and then ended up switching from hockey to snowboarding. When I was 17, I made the junior national team and kind of had my whole goal as making the Olympics. Unfortunately, in 2014, I fell short. Started struggling with some things on the mental side and ended up leaving the sport in 2015, as well as, riddled with injuries as most snowboarders and action sport athletes are. And then I dove into the sport of CrossFit and got into the business world. And that's kind of what carries me forward to today. It's been about 6 years since I stepped away from snowboarding, which is absolutely mind blowing to think that I only spent 4 years part of the national team program, but it's such a huge part of who I am. And it's been 6 years since then. So it's actually been longer since that transition than I actually spent in it.
And when you say snowboarding, you're talking slope style, that's correct?
Yes, slopestyle, yep.
And then you mentioned you're in the entrepreneurship world now. What avenues has that taken?
Yeah, so I work in the athlete marketing space. So it's really gone in many avenues as kind of the marketing world does. When I first transitioned, I worked with a ton of clients from e-commerce to large brands, small businesses, all over the place, and got a ton of experience learning from there. But then I transitioned right back into the athlete marketing space because it's a big part of my story of having to learn how to market myself and get sponsorships, and so kind of helping athletes do the same thing.
Oh, such a valuable experience and service for your clients, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important. It's more than just being able to get sponsorships, right? It's like empowering them to take control of their narrative, their story. And now with social media more than ever, like back in the day, it was like put some stickers up on your board and that's how you promote your sponsors. But nowadays, like, you got to be on social media to become a full-time athlete. And especially when it comes to, like, I'm really motivated to empower women in sport. And even the top pro athletes are not being paid much when it comes to, female athletics. And so if they can learn how to leverage social media, they can make more and impact the next generation.
I was having a conversation at the climbing gym the other day around a similar topic and how there's very few professional outdoor sport athletes who make their living solely on the sport itself, as opposed to representing sponsors and being a public figure.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I think that's just that's what you got to do nowadays, right? Like less eyes are necessarily on the pictures, the view on the podium. There's less print magazines; those are going out of business all the time. So social media is kind of that place where it is hard for some action sport athletes to transition to because they just want to be outside of cell coverage, right? But you do have to learn how to kind of communicate your story through that avenue to be able to do what you do and have the finances to pursue it.
That's great. And in line with that, what's something that we might not know about you?
Oof. That I am an introvert. Most people I like to talk on podcasts. I like to do a lot of speaking. I post a lot of videos, but people don't know like some of those things definitely leave me exhausted. I'm someone who needs my alone time to refresh and think, and then that allows me to have the higher energy when I am doing talks and hanging around people. But I'm definitely that person who will take a night home alone over going to a party like any day of the week. I actually, when I was part of the national snowboard team, when I turned the legal drinking age in Canada, I didn't drink for 2 years. And so, snowboarding is kind of a party culture, and the action sports world is really a party culture, and I just didn't partake at all.
I think that's something a lot of us can probably relate to, and that introverted side where we get our energy right is often more insular than it appears on the outside.
Oh, 100%. Like my brother is an extrovert, like through and through. And so is my mom. And then my dad and I are both very introverted. And so we kind of thrive during, lockdown time, and they're like missing their friends. And of course, we're feeling the same, but it's like we're like, oh, we have time to focus, we can work, less distractions. And there are people who really need to be around people to get their energy.
Great. So, thinking about your career to date, have there been any standout moments, either athletically or in the business world?
Oh yeah, I mean a ton of different ones, both positive and negative for sure, like anyone's journey. But I just have so many great memories of my time, especially my time spent snowboarding and just moments of flow. I was talking with a high performance coach recently and asking him about, do you think when we're in these higher moments of flow, those are the moments that we can then recall better? And there's so many moments that we're not totally present in, and it's hard for us to go back and live in there, but I can remember some like winning contest runs, and I can put myself in my body then and my eyes and like feel how it felt. And I just love to reflect on those. So some of those moments of flow are some of my favorite times, and I feel like I'm always trying to seek that back out, despite not being in that world all the time 24/7.
So, I'm curious how you find those moments of flow in your life nowadays, right? You mentioned you transitioned into being a CrossFit athlete and you're a very successful CrossFit athlete, and the same with the business world. Do you find moments of flow in that, and how do they come about for you?
Yeah, I think I'm big on energy management. So figuring out those times of like high linear focus during the day versus times of just like kind of creativity. So there are times, especially for me, it's like mid morning and I'm like chipping away on some work, and I just find myself like in that grind and I'm in it. And all of a sudden it'd be like an hour, 2 hours in, and I'm like, wow, I just finished like a whole branding project that probably should have taken me a week. And so that kind of feels good. It doesn't replace, that snowboarding in the air flow, but it is cool to be in that moment and be so present and just get that stuff done and feel like your brain was really on some sort of focused moment for a long period of time. And then for me also, it's doing some more of those low intensity sports. Like I find cross country skiing, I can get into a flow, especially have no headphones in, maybe be with my dog and just totally present, like the wind, the sun, the weather, the snow on my face, like all those little moments. That really does help me. In CrossFit, it's a little bit harder because you are like dying inside. Your heart rate's like 200. You're lifting weights, you're moving from one movement to the next. So sometimes you don't really get to that place of just calm flow, but some of those endurance sports, you can definitely get there.
Thank you. Yeah, a couple of things stand out to me there. One I'm kind of still curious about, and one I kind of have a comment on. So the one I'm curious about is how, when you're getting into those moments of flow in your business or your entrepreneur life, is there anything that prompts that for you? Is there anything that triggers that? Are there any kind of routines you've developed to help promote that more frequently?
Yeah. So one thing is just the timing and like learning when that time of day is that I'm more able to get to that point, because there's other times of day, especially, I hit that 2, 3 p.m. crash where it's going to be very difficult for me to get in that place. I wake up every day and meditate and do that kind of whole morning routine. So that definitely helps as well. But some days it just, I'll put on music, and certain music with certain beats can kind of help me get into that place faster. And also just, having one tab open, focusing exactly, maybe a post-it note saying, okay, this is the project I'm going to work on. Maybe I'll pull out a whiteboard and I'll create the whole environment to really, be focused at that one task, rather than sending emails at the same time of doing a Zoom call at the same time of, writing down some notes.
I think hearing about that intentionality in everything you do is so important for us to hear, especially right now where we're spending so much time. I'm surrounded by monitors in my office, and I've got my phone on my table over here, and so there's so many distractions, especially working in this environment. I really like how intentional you are in that design.
I mean, I kind of have to be. I have ADHD, and if I don't, like, I have to figure it out. And I actually was only recently diagnosed, but it's something that I kind of knew my whole childhood that I had. And so it's been interesting because I'll talk with people about it, and they're like, "Why are you so like obsessed with your energy management, your focus, like your routines?" And I was like, "Well, that's just like a coping mechanism I've had since I was a kid of like." even dealing with post concussions and things like that, where I've had to really figure out how to focus and how to get my stuff done when I'm managing all these different things. So I think it's just really important to be intentional when you have to deal with things like that.
It's amazing how even pre-diagnosis we find ways to make it work, right? We adapt to what we have inside us and find a way to make it work in our external environment.
Right. I mean, you have to. And I'm someone who like sometimes I overcommit, right? And I have like a business and sport and training, and so it kind of forces me with no other choice. Like otherwise I would just have, get nothing done and not be able to do anything. And so like I did university online. So I had to really learn how to manage my schedule. There was no, teacher or lectures that were telling me kind of what time to do what. And so I think from that it kind of stemmed of having to be autonomous and learn these things.
Yeah, that self time management and scheduling piece has been something I'm sure my students have been learning over the last 12 months, and a lot of us can relate to. And then my second comment
Yeah.
was to do with the movement aspect. You mentioned low intensity movements being like a really positive way for you to engage in flow states. And very often when we think about meditation, we think about really Eastern forms of movement, right? Like mindful movement is a key piece of meditation, and we think about yoga and Tai Chi and really Eastern forms of exercise and moving our body. But mindful movement doesn't necessarily have to come in these Eastern forms of movement. It can come in kind of more Western based activities. And very frequently, I talk to clients who, they ski tour or they cross country ski. And that's a real source of kind of mindful movement and almost like a meditative process for them. And it sounds like you've come across that too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I definitely agree. And I'm like someone who I can't stay still. I've learned through meditation to be still in that process. But for me, it's like, yeah, that moving forward. It's almost like that runner's high, except for I am a very heavy and inefficient runner. So I do not get the runner's high because I do more sprinting than long distance. But doing a low impact thing like biking or cross country skiing, like you said, you can definitely just get into that nice flow state, hiking, walking. I think, yeah, for sure, people forget about that. They think you just have to sit somewhere, just do yoga or Tai Chi, exactly like you said. But you can get to those places in different ways. And I think that those ways are different for different people.
Yeah, I love the final piece there about recognizing the individual differences. And I think that's something that is always key to be front of our minds when we're designing these practices.
Yeah, 100%.
So, how about challenges along the way? You mentioned some injuries. I see you laughing even as soon as I mentioned that. But what are some of the challenges you faced? How did they affect
Uh,
you in the moment? How did they affect you in hindsight? What have your reflections been like on this?
Yeah, I mean, ton of challenges. I'm actually working on a TED Talk and it's all about failure and failing forward because for me, like, these challenges have made me who I am and enabled me like I'm happy with where I'm at and I'm happy with where I'm going. So no regrets about the challenges I've faced, but in the moment they were definitely very, very difficult. I had a lot of injuries. I think right before I even got onto the junior national team, I had to overcome a broken tailbone to win the event that then ended up getting me onto that junior national team program. So that was like a 2 week turnaround from tailbone break to competition. And that was, young age. I've had to deal with concussions and then trying to write exams in high school afterwards. Those were always difficult circumstances. More concussions as they went along, broken ribs. I had a heel injury where I was told this afterwards that the surgeon thought I would never jump again ever, and he partnered with my physio. He's like a sport medicine doctor, and he told her that, but she didn't pass it along to me. And so I just went to see her every single day, did my treatment, got back to lifting and everything. And suddenly, the next winter I was back at it. But there was a long, long recovery time, especially at first not knowing what it was, having to go to, travel around the world to big competitions and it would just re injure. And it's like I spent all that money and gone all that way for it to, just happen in the practice and not make it to the actual competition. And then figuring out what it was and realizing how long a process it would be to heal. I find, especially with seasonal sports, when you have some of these injuries, it's just such a big setback because it can ruin your whole year. Because if you miss out on the rest of the winter, well, all of a sudden it's summer, and so like great, you can recover, but you don't have your sport for those 6 months. And for other people, they can train any day, so they're not out for 6 months, maybe they're out for 2 months and then back at it, but our season is over. So if you get injured at different times in the year, especially if it's early in the season, that can be really, really big setback mentally and physically.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing there is that seasonality component of a lot of action and outdoor based sports, right, where we're constricted by the conditions and what facilities are available to us. And I think that's something we don't often consider when we're talking injuries in skiing, climbing, mountain biking, that injuries can end a season, and by ending a season, it essentially ends our year of practice in a lot of ways.
Yeah, exactly that. It's like it's just a major setback, right? Like if you're a cyclist, chances are you could cycle. I mean, if you're up here in Canada, you can't cycle in the winter, but you got your indoor cycling and everything that you can be doing. And there might even be indoor challenges and competitions. Same thing for like CrossFit. You know, you can do that at any gym year round. But when it comes to like some of these outdoor sports where things depend on the weather, you have very few open windows to really get high quality training days in. And so they can be a major setback. And they are so injury prone that these things happen. You can have 4 years in a row of injuries, and then you're out of the entire Olympic cycle just like that. And 4 years, I like to look as a time optimist. Like, we have a lot of life left in us to go, but like 4 years when it comes to being an elite athlete, that's a lot of time.
Totally. And we talked a bit about the challenges there. I'm curious, kind of what are your takeaways? How do you reflect on that? You mentioned you're working on a TED talk about failing forwards. What does failing forwards mean for you? Do you want to expand more on that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't believe that there is a thing as failure in a sense. Like in the moment, you do have to feel that pain to be able to learn from it. But if you have learned from it, then it wasn't really a failure. You learned something. Like that was just feedback. And so I'm a big believer of failing forward. Like people could look at my career and say, well, you didn't make the Olympics. You didn't have, a tenure in pro snowboarding. You were in there for 4 years and then you step back. You didn't make it to X Games. And I'm like, well, but look how that built to what I'm doing now. If I didn't experience some of those things, if I didn't experience the mental health issues that I had when retiring, I wouldn't be able to go back and speak on it and make an impact on other people who are going through the same thing. And for a long time, I didn't believe that was true. I thought, who am I to speak about my story and my struggles unless I am the Olympic gold medalist, unless I am, the X Games gold medalist. And what I've realized in the last couple of years, now that I've kind of been through it and healed some of that trauma, is that, there's power in, only one person can tell like the story of being the Olympic gold medalist, but there's so many people who can relate to the person who just fell short. So I think everyone has a story to tell, and if you learn from your setbacks, then it's not really failing at all. The only failure is not trying, because then you would guarantee yourself of not ever, moving forward.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Natalie. I really appreciate that openness when discussing some of these challenges. I'm curious if you're interested in expanding a little bit more on that transition phase. I know that's something we all face as athletes, whether it's something we get to choose the time period for, or whether it's something that's forced on us. But at a certain time, there's a transition from elite athlete to non elite athlete. And I'm curious what that transition phase was like. You mentioned some challenges in there.
Yeah, it was an extremely difficult time in my life. I think, especially being an athlete and, kind of getting thrown into that world at the age of 17 and not having a traditional college experience, there was a lot of maturity that I had to go through very quickly, and in other aspects of my life that I didn't ever get to go through. So you're thrown into a world with people much older, people much younger, like pro athletes and all these different things, and traveling around and people partying, and then people taking things more seriously and all these different aspects, and trying to make the right decisions and grow through that. But at the same time, college is a big coming of age time for many people, and you're in more of like a safe environment. There's people telling you what to do, and from I kind of became like basically like I have my own business as a solo athlete from day one of being 17, and then having to manage online school and all these things. And so there was a lot of aspects that I didn't realize I had neglected, learning how to be a good friend, learning about relationships, just different things. And so I kind of ignored them for a while. And all of a sudden I just started feeling homesick, started feeling like I had my snowboard friends and then I had my home friends, and everyone was growing in different directions, and I never really fit in one place, and starting to realize some of these things that I had never really thought about. And so when I did step away it was really difficult because my entire identity was being a snowboarder. It's how anyone introduced me. It's how my friends, at parties would say, "Oh, this is my friend. She's a national team snowboarder." I know my parents are extremely supportive, but that's how they would introduce me to their friends, right? And kind of hype their kid up as being the snowboarder or whatever it is. So that was really hard. I started realizing, like, will anyone like me if I'm not the snowboarder? Will people want to hang out with me? What is even my life purpose anymore? Because I had this one singular goal all my life, and now I'm kind of left without. And so I was lucky to have, my business and CrossFit and different things that I could pursue, but didn't really take away the pain of having to deal with that. And so I started going through some really rough times. I was having a lot of panic attacks, dealing with a lot of anxiety. So I ended up going to my doctor and getting diagnosed with depression and anxiety and going to seek therapy. And kind of coming out of that time, I actually booked a one-way ticket to Bali like 6 months after that. Spent a month just by myself, which I realized I had only ever traveled with a team, with people that you kind of have to impress, like your competitors. You have to act a certain way around them. Your coaches, you want to make the team the next year, you kind of have to be professional. There's all these expectations. And then I got there and I have no label associated with me. I have no identity I have to live up to. I could just figure out, like, what do I want? Who am I as a human being, not as an athlete?
Again, thank you for sharing that with us. It sounds like you've done a lot of self work on developing over the years. Has your relationship with that identity as a national team athlete changed over time? Is it something you're kind of now proud of? How would you describe that?
Yeah, one exercise that my therapist gave to me that was really impactful was writing a letter to snowboarding. And I realized, because I had been having a rough year, thinking I wanted to retire, and then still trying to trudge on and compete, and like not telling my coaches that I wanted to step back because I still wanted to play out the rest of the season. That I held a lot of resentment towards the sport. So for a while, I just didn't want to go snowboarding. I think when I watched the 2018 Olympics, one of my friends came, she got the silver medal. And I remember just crying, and my parents turned around. They just knew I would be upset. And I was just so happy for her. But at the same time, realizing that could have been me. Like, why did I, step away? And so even realizing that years later, it still is going to sting a little bit. But I have gotten to the point where, even with CrossFit kind of filled a gap there where I was still able to be an athlete. I think most of my snowboard friends thought that I left snowboarding because I was getting to a high level in CrossFit. So I was able to kind of hold on to that identity of being, a top athlete. And then now it's been about 2 years since my last competition because of my shoulder and then the pandemic. And it's crazy to me because I've been sharing this with different people that I'm in absolutely no rush to get back to competition. Like, I don't feel I have a chip on my shoulder to prove anything to anyone. It's like, I know that I can make it to the top of a sport if I want to, but now it's just, do I want to? Do I want to do it? I know I have the mental toughness. I know I have the physical abilities, and I don't have to prove that to anyone. If I want to go out cycling instead of training for CrossFit, I can do that. If I want to work on building my business instead of trying to, be an athlete, I can do that too. And so now I feel in a place where, if I do go back into competing at a high level in sport, I can do it without the need to prove anything to anyone, because I just feel like I'm enough without it, and I'll just do it from a place of just purely fun and enjoyment.
It sounds like you've done a lot of growing over the years, and a lot of, like I mentioned, self work and development. And to me, what I'm hearing is that a lot of those values you learned from your time in snowboarding and then your time in CrossFit are really transferring over into your day to day life, right? The preparation, the dedication, the ability to take care of yourself and recognize the awareness of your needs. It seems like a lot of that is carrying over in a really positive way. Is that accurate?
Yeah, you know what? It's fun because I like to look at, like, business or anything I'm doing in a sport mindset. Like, I always approach everything like, okay, how do I warm up for this? How do I train to get better for this certain opportunity? How do I structure my day? And a lot of my day still does structure around, when's my workout? When am I going to do this? And so I think that's one of the cool things about being an entrepreneur as well, and why I think a lot of athletes would really enjoy and succeed at being an entrepreneur, is because you can still manage your schedule. You can still kind of be your own brand and business, and try to look at things through that same light of high performance, but just take it into a different realm.
Well, again, thank you for sharing that experience with us. I think that's something we can all learn from, whether we're involved in high performance athletics or we're just trying to be the best us we can be.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think high performance goes across so many different realms in life, like from everything from wanting to be a high performing dad or wanting to be a high performing athlete.
So outside of your time in business and your athletic life, I see you also do some mindset coaching and some high performance coaching. And what I'm curious about is what kind of mindset do you approach your life with, your athletics with? I think it comes out a lot in our previous conversation. But could you offer just a summary of that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge advocate for the growth mindset. And I've just realized as someone who creates a lot of content, that's like what I think about all the time is like mindset and high performance. So I'm like, well, that's, if you're thinking of what is your content going to be as a content creator, it's going to be what you're doing all the time. And I was like, despite the fact that I'm training all the time, that's like, it's more than who I am. Like it's the mindset, it's the things that I try to approach things with. And so I'm just a big proponent of trying to get 1% better every day. I never want to live like it makes me cringe when people say, "Oh, those were the good old days." Like I peaked in high school. If I would look at my life as a failure if I would went back and said I peaked in high school or I peaked during my time snowboarding. I want my peak to be on my deathbed. I want to just continuously be, increasing my knowledge, my abilities, and sharing, learning, creating with other people. Whatever I learn, hopefully sharing back and impacting and helping and making a difference in some way. And so I kind of just approach everything as, every day, how can I get 1% better in all these different aspects that matter to me? And then how can I hopefully inspire other people to do the same in their lives?
I love how interwoven that is with your values and how you go about approaching your day to day.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I try to stick to some of those things, but they definitely evolve over time. And I think that's one of the cool things about life, right? Like what you cared about when you were 15 is probably different than what you cared about when you're 25. And I've been realizing that you can have these core values, which is important to have, but you never have to like stick to these core beliefs. Like, for example, if I think meditation is the best way, to improve myself emotionally, mentally, whatever, and someone tries to argue with me and tell me like, no, it's not meditation, you should do this other thing, I want to be open-minded to that because my value is just being a better human. And if you can tell me there's a better way to do that, then I want to be open-minded to being able to adapt and change my beliefs on that, and taking in different advice and learn from anyone I can.
Yeah, that's one of the key tenets of growth mindset, right? Like feedback is an opportunity to learn rather than a threat to our ego or our current abilities.
Yeah, yeah, and you know what? As I've worked on that, I've realized like I think it's hard for some people to realize if they're in a fixed or a growth mindset because some people have never heard of the concept, and then if they've heard of the concept, they haven't heard of like how do you actually recognize which mindset you're in and what stage and in that you're going to. And it's been interesting because I've had some conversations lately. I feel like everyone I talk to, I just assume that they have a growth mindset, and so we kind of use those at that as the platform and build our conversation from that. But there's been a few conversations I've had lately where I've really had to challenge myself in the sense of I think that that person will be open to feedback, or I think that that person has this growth mindset, so I can kind of make some assumptions and tell them a certain thing. And then I see the challenge, or I see them getting angry or upset, and I get confused. I'm like, wait, like, why would that make you upset? And then I realize they're still in that fixed mindset, and nothing wrong with that. They just haven't like figured out that growth mindset or haven't dived deep or heard the concept in the first place. And so that's been an interesting challenge of trying to figure that out and how you can best communicate from a growth minded perspective to a fixed minded perspective without belittling or trying to say you should do this, right? Like you want people to discover those things on their own.
Hey, so I fall into this all the time, the exact same as you. I basically assume that everyone has my implicit knowledge around mindset and particularly Carol Dweck's work on fixed and growth mindset, and I often completely forget that that's come from decades of study and not just like something everyone knows. Um,
Yeah.
but do you want to give us like a quick overview of what is fixed and growth mindset and how's that work?
Yeah, so I just posted up on my podcast account like a little like saying, and it was basically like instead of saying like I could never do that, He's like, I can't do that yet. And I think that's like a big key proponent between the fixed and the growth mindset. When you're in a fixed mindset, you're like, I could never be that. Or you see someone who's mentally tough and doing, for example, I like to do a lot of cold exposure work, and people who will say, I could never do that. That's crazy. But then there's people who are saying, wow, like, right now, I think I could never do that, but I would love to learn and I would love to try and get there. So realizing that you are not fixed in your abilities, you weren't born just, how you are, and you'll never improve or grow from there. You can change your mindset. You can change your physical abilities. You can always get better. There's always room to improve and things to learn. And when you are in that fixed mindset, it's hard for you to take feedback, because if you take feedback on something, it's like, well, this is who I am. I can't change. So I'm going to take this very personally because I can't change this. But, for someone in a growth mindset gets feedback, for example, hey, you're slow, but you can get faster if you work on this footwork. It's not me. If I was in a fixed mindset, I would say, well, what the heck? Why are you saying I'm slow? That's just going to make me upset. I was born that way and I'm not going to get faster. But if you're in a growth mindset, you're like, okay, perfect. What are those steps that I can take, because I know I can get faster? I can improve upon this. And so that's where it also becomes difficult, right? To speak to both of those different personas, because if you're speaking to the growth mindset, you can be more open about that feedback. But when you're speaking to the fixed mindset, that feedback is going to come with some conflict.
It sounds like there's a really good takeaway in there for any kind of coaches or parents or mentors in the audience too, about the recognition piece, right, and being able to acknowledge where your athlete's at and meeting them at that stage.
Right, exactly. And I mean, that's something I struggle with as well, even with those closest to me, that I've realized, okay, I want to push you to build these high performance habits, but I just realized you don't have the growth mindset yet. So how can I try to make things not, sound like I'm giving you bad feedback, like saying, hey, like this is wrong with you. I'm not saying that at all. And so you do have to be very picky with your words and your verbiage when it does come to that point when you do recognize that, because people are going to take your feedback in different senses depending on what mindset they have or they're in the current moment even.
And I think for the athletes or the participants listening, it's really important to recognize that these mindset differences aren't black or white, like for our life in general, right? They happen on for different attributes or different skills or different tasks. I always offer my students the example that I've always been bad at math, as bad at math when I was a kid, as bad at math as a student, a grad student, and bad at math as a professor. My mindset about math is that I am not genetically built to do math. But if you were to ask me about my abilities as a climber or an academic or a consultant, I'd say that I've got better every day, and I'm still getting better every day. It's
Yeah.
always kind of interesting, I think, to recognize that difference.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing for me, right? I'll tell people that, like, I am not artistic in the sense, like, I cannot draw, I cannot sing, and I cannot dance. But at the same time, like, I can play the drums, I can create video content. There's different things that I'm like, oh wait, I am creative in a different sense. I just, some people are born with amazing drawing capabilities, some people aren't. But sometimes looking at that perspective, saying, if I did spend like 10,000 hours working on my drawing, I'm sure I could train myself to be good at it. I'm just not passionate about it, so I'm not going to do that. But there is the ability there. If you put in the work, you might not get to be a Picasso or someone who has that natural talent or who is so passionate about it that they've done it all their lives, but you could definitely improve in some sense.
I like the Anders Ericsson, Malcolm Gladwell reference snuck in there. So how about mental skills, psychological skills when you are faced with high pressure situations, when you need to perform on demand, maybe even when you need to manage the stresses of life and take care of your self care? Are there any skills or abilities or strategies that you use from a psychological perspective to help yourself in a day to day?
Yeah, I mean, from an ADHD perspective, I love high pressure. I'm like, leave things to the last minute and they'll get done better, because it's hard to build that motivation when it's so far out that you need to do it then. And I've only realized now that like that's always been something natural to me, is like, okay, wait for that high pressure situation. But I realize that it is linked to ADHD, which is interesting. And so, some skills though, like when it does come to high pressure moments and say maybe your heart rate's pumping and you got to drop in to snowboard, or you're about to do a big speaking event and you're nervous. There are things like breath work. Breath work is huge for me. And there's different ways where you can just do, like the double inhale, one exhale kind of thing. And that's like pretty quick. Or you can sit down and do a full 10-minute breath work or 10-minute meditation. Music, I think, is also something that's very helpful if you want to tap into. I think there's a reason why athletes put on the headphones and get into the zone. I know for me, snowboarding on different competition days, I had certain songs that I would put on repeat the whole day because they put me in a certain, kind of chill but like aggressive state for snowboarding. And so those are some of the tools that I use, definitely breath work, meditation, music, kind of changing my environment as well, making sure I do things in certain environments that match what the mood or the energy or the actual task that I'm trying to do.
And what stands out to me when you mention breath work is you mention the different time frames, right? And very often we think about breath work as being this like long, involved task that unless we have half an hour, we can't engage in. But I love that you're recognizing, and maybe you can expand on this more, the different time constraints you can use it in. You mentioned kind of breathing patterns or constricted breathing just before dropping in, almost to activate our parasympathetic nervous system and lower our heart rate.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I nerd out on like neuroscience and different things. So I listen to a lot of podcasts in that space, and I know like Dr. Andrew Huberman, he talks about the double inhale. So two breaths in, you can do it through your nose, and then kind of like a long exhale, and you do maybe two or three of those, and you're kind of tapping into that parasympathetic pretty quickly. I am also though a big believer of like some of these tools you can use very quickly, but it does come from having learned how to use them in a longer time frame in the beginning. Like I've known some people who tell me they just can't do meditation, and I was like, well, what have you done to try to learn it? They're like, 5 minutes every day, and it just doesn't do anything. And I said, well, I think some of those things with meditation is if you're not used to meditation, it's going to be very difficult to in 5 minutes get into that zone. Like you need the time to be able to get to that calm mind place. And so maybe doing, if you can, like a weekend course or doing longer meditation so that then you can get into that place faster where maybe 5 minutes a day is all you need, or 5 minutes before an event is going to work for you. But if it's like your first time doing it and you only give yourself 5 minutes, it might not actually work.
Yeah, I always make the joke, especially with clients, that I've had so many clients over the years who've said, like, hey, Andre, I did that breathing thing, like, just before finals. It didn't work. Breath work doesn't work for me. It's like, well, I mean, we didn't really practice it during the season. We didn't put any time into it in training. You just tried it once before finals and it didn't work. Now we've got
Yeah.
12 months until it happens again. So let's, like, start practicing.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, like my boyfriend says, I just can't get into meditation, and like he tried it with me for 10 minutes once, and I was like, well, I could understand that because for me it was the same way. But then when I went to Bali, I took hour-long classes, and there was like the motorcycles going by, so things were loud, and so it took half an hour just to get into that zone. Then over years of practice, it's become easier and easier to when now I could just do a 5-minute session when I need to, and kind of tap into that. But I think people forget that these things do take time. It's not immediate. It's like fitness. Like you do one workout and that's it. You're not going to see that improvement, but over time, you're going to be able to do it. And similarly with fitness, right? Like if you went to the gym for years doing 2-hour sessions, you built up all this strength. If you take 6 months off and you just have time every day to do a 10-minute quick hit session, you can maintain some of your strength and fitness more than someone who only is just going to do those 10-minute sessions from the get-go. But it's because you have those years of practice to fall back on.
Yeah, this is off topic for this interview series, but I read a really interesting paper the other day on minimum effective dose and how little we need to maintain physical strength once we're already in a highly trained state.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's helped me a ton. Like, for example, one time I had a snowboard injury and 6 months of no squatting. And within 2 weeks of being back, I hit a new squat PR. And I think, that muscle, like part of it is genetics. Like I am someone who's pretty easy to put on more strength or muscle versus takes me a lot longer to build endurance gains. But it is true. And I think that minimum effective dose does go for different things mentally as well. Like if you build a habit, or you try to build a habit and you take a bunch of days off right when you're starting to build it, it's just a whole process. But if you've done a habit all your life and then, for 6 months you do something new and then you want to go back, it's not going to take as long to build that habit back.
Hey, great segue into habits, strategies, routines. What are some of the things that have been game changers for you, and how have you gone about building this?
Yeah, I mean, meditation, like we already discussed, that's huge. For me, I moved in January, and so since I moved, it's been really helpful for me just to kind of create a new routine. I'm a big believer of like you can't just change your life overnight. Like build one small habit and focus on it, and then once that becomes the norm, maybe build and stack another habit on top of that. You can't just be like, okay, my entire life and schedule is going to change tomorrow. It's gonna cause some problems, but in a sense, because I have had these routines built already, kind of going back to that whole minimum effective dose and then being able to kind of build back. When I moved and had kind of fallen out of the habits with the pandemic, I was able to kind of build my routine back to where it was at the height and almost do that overnight in a sense because I created an environment that made it easy. So, just getting used to waking up earlier. And then I made a whole room. I set out all my stuff so that I'm ready to meditate first thing. I'm ready to go and see some sunlight and get outside because I set out all my stuff right beside my bed. So it doesn't take me that extra effort to grab my clothes. I'm able to do my breath work because I already have loaded up on my phone the YouTube video right there. So I try to just create the environment and make it easier. So some of those things are really big for me, just having my morning routine all scheduled out. And then same thing before night. Like I use the blue light glasses and different things, but just similarly, like making sure I'm calming myself down and not doing things that like wind myself up right before bed. So maybe I do some stretching, maybe another meditation session, depending, how I'm feeling before I go to sleep.
I love that pre-sleep routine piece. I feel like we often think about pre-performance routines, especially in sports psychology all the time. It's all pre-performance routine, pre-performance routine. And we neglect that we can use those skills in other areas of our life, right? So those pre-sleep routines, how do I keep consistency in this? How do I build in all of the stuff that really helps me? And how do I make use of the tools I already have in my athletic toolkit to benefit my rest and recovery?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a really important subject, which is that a lot of athletes they do a warm up in a sense, and they do a mental warm up, like a pre performance routine, like you said, but nothing to calm themselves down and build that recovery. And one of the biggest game changers in my training, and I made a TikTok video that went viral about this, and I was surprised that no athletes, especially the younger athletes, had any idea this was like a thing. But it's something that my CrossFit coach had me do, and even in snowboarding we never focused on some of these things. Like of course we did like maybe an ice bath or flush out the legs on the bike after snowboarding, but nothing mentally, which I think would have been very valuable. And so I would do 10 minutes the minute I finished my workout, especially if I was doing 2 sessions in the day, and I would just lay down, kind of put my legs up higher. I don't think that matters too much, and breathe in and out of my nose, and just count the breaths. And if I would count to 10, counting like in is one, out is two, and then if I lost track, like I got any bit distracted, I'd just restart. And so sometimes you restart and restart and restart. You got to be honest with yourself. Like any distraction, don't just like fight through and all of a sudden you're at 10. Like actually restart. And then when I get to 10, then I would do one breath in and out is one, and then kind of reset that whole cycle, just with a longer time frame, back up to 10 again. And I would just do that for 10 minutes. And it got to the point where I would go to competitions and in between workouts, I could sleep, I could nap. And that was so rare. If you're like, burning this nervous energy in between events, you're not going to be fully refreshed for that next event. But for me, I was able to sleep and go into this parasympathetic sympathetic state to get that extra recovery within those couple hours before I had to go and do another workout. And I think that was something that helped immensely, but I think it's overlooked in a lot of sports.
It really stands out how that skill and practice that you've built over time pays dividends on game day, right? In a way that we often can't expect, or competition day with CrossFit.
Yeah, and even in normal life, for example, like if you have a stressful Zoom meeting with like your boss or something, or whatever you're doing is kind of burning a lot of nervous energy, like perhaps take that time and go for a walk if you know that's something that resets you. Because for me, if I like go back to back to back Zooms or speaking events or whatever it is, I just feel dead, and then like the next day I'm going to be tired. But if I schedule, like for example, after this I'm going to go work out, and that's going to be fun. Or sometimes later in the afternoon, if I had a Zoom, I'll go and just take my dog for a walk, and I'll schedule that in right after, because I know if I go from that into another like high mentally challenging task of, okay, I have a work project, I need to start it right after, I'm going to end up so much more burnt out. But if I can take that 10-minute reset, then I'm able to continue on with my day. And I think like that consistency and long-term mindset always will pay off versus like, let me pack as many things as I can into one day and then crash all the next night and the next day.
I suspect I know the answer to this, but have you read Atomic Habits, James Clear?
Yes, 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 I have. Yeah, you know what? That book comes up in so many conversations. It's definitely like the top recommended book of this past year.
Definitely, and it stands out when you talk about habit forming, right? Like creating an environment to make it easy, try to lower the barriers to forming habits as much as we
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, I think that's important, right? Like we all think we have unlimited mental willpower, but that's not the case. Like let's like reserve some of those things for when you really need it, and instead just use it when you do have to. But like trying to create a frictionless environment where you don't have to use it as often.
Fantastic. Natalie, who's inspired you along the way? And then part two of that question is what have you learned from them? Have you got anything you want to pass on?
Yeah, oof. I mean, there's so many different people that have inspired me, honestly. Like, I really am just motivated to learn from anyone and everyone. Like whether it's someone on the street that I can have a conversation with and learn from, or it's coaches or high level athletes that have come before me. I'm big on reading books, and so there's so many people in books that have inspired me in some way. I think definitely like my parents and my family too. I have parents who are very different. My mom is a very empathetic, kind, non competitive person. My dad is more similar to me on the side of being competitive, more introverted, entrepreneurial. And I've learned something from each of them in that sense of, working hard and being nice to people and, focusing on family and all these different things while on the way.
Oh, those are such valuable takeaways. Were your parents athletes?
My dad, not none of them were like high level athletes. My mom has surprisingly amazing genetics for someone who doesn't play sports. Like when I was young, I broke my leg and she had to take me to the gym twice a week. She had like hardly ever trained before that. And I swear within 4 weeks, she had a six pack. And I was like, how is this even possible? Like I was so mind blown. And my dad just said her and my dad got back into weight training. And he's like, it's insane. Like she's already like she gets such a good effect from like a minimum, like minimum effective dose training. Like she doesn't have to train much to get a really great effect. So, but she's not competitive at all. So I think she's played maybe volleyball and maybe a little bit of running or something in school. But other than like school sports, nothing. But my dad was big into football and hockey, and so he did play some of those like outside of school and everything. And so sports were always, a big part of both of their lives, I think, in a sense.
So you're really wise, you're really reflective. Obviously, you've had such a varied journey in not just the sport world, but the performance world overall. Is there any great advice you've received along the way? Any quotes that really resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean, just being present in the process. Like I said, I can go back to some certain moments and like remember when I was in the zone and how that felt. But there's a lot of moments that I can't go back. And to be honest, there's a lot of times in my snowboard career where I was just focused on the next moment. Like I want to make the Olympics in 4 years. I want to make the Olympics in 3 years. I want to make the Olympics in 2 years from now. And sometimes when you're so focused on that, you're not in that exact present moment. And I like to say that presence can help improve productivity, but if you're only focusing on productivity, it's not going to improve your presence. And so I think if you can be present in the moment, that's only going to assist with all these other things you're going through. And you only have the present moment. That's all you have. So if you're only focusing on the future, you're going to get to the end of your life realizing that you don't remember anything that went on and you weren't ever fully in that moment.
It is such powerful advice for all of us to heed.
Yeah, I think in all aspects of life that just whether you want to be more productive or not, right? Like just being present and being okay with, me sitting in my office right now, I'm like perfectly content. People always think they need something external to be content, this new car, this gold medal or whatever it is, but you can be content anywhere and that won't take away from your drive to achieve anything.
Yeah, that duality, like those dual beliefs really stand out to me, right? Where you're almost having this double think of chasing this future or external object or reward, while also recognizing that being in the present is the way you're going to achieve that.
Yeah, and I mean, I had to learn those things the hard way, right? Like, especially in my snowboard career, I wish that I had the mindset I had now and could go back into it because it was always just trying to achieve something. And I always thought that if I was happy in that present moment, it would take away like what would I need more or why would I need to try to get to that next level? But I've really realized that no, like having being in the present moment and being okay of being happy with nothing will not take away your drive and motivation to get the certain thing that you want.
Well, again, thank you for sharing that with us. Is there any advice you'd offer your younger self when you think back to maybe when you were starting out your athletic career with hockey and then with snowboarding, or even to your time kind of just post retirement? Is there any advice that you'd offer your younger self?
Yeah, honestly, probably just that. Like exactly that of being present. Like, some of my best memories are like hockey tournaments with my friends or some of the snowboard competitions and the times off the mountain and off competing. And I just wish I would have been a little bit more present. Like I have no regrets because obviously I had to learn those lessons and have some of those thoughts to get to where I am now, where I do place such a high value on presence. But I do think, those would be some of the greatest memories that you have. So live them out fully in the present moment.
Again, such valuable advice for all of us to heed.
Yeah, it's a lesson to myself for sure.
Not to move us away from the topic of presence, but what's the future look like for you? Do you have any upcoming plans, projects, anything you're super stoked on?
Yeah, I mean, working on this TED Talk, it's all virtual, so that kind of allows like me as a content creator is I'm really excited about it because yeah, as much fun as it would be to be standing on a stage that says TEDx and speak, I think it's going to be really cool to create something that's different, and filming things from kind of home or whatever it is will be interesting. So I'm really excited to work on that and kind of get that project going. Um, I'm working on a course in the athlete marketing space because I think it's really important not just to help the already pro athletes, but to help even just the high school athletes or the younger athletes who are coming up to start thinking about social media properly and even just how to mindfully use social media and not get sucked into some of the negative aspects. So excited about working on that and just really excited for, hopefully things to open up in the future and get back to, seeing friends and doing sports with other people will be awesome when we can get back to doing that.
Fingers crossed that's sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic, but also realistic. It could be, maybe next year by this time, but I'm hoping that we get back there.
Me and you both. What does your support system look like? Who do you have around you? Who's kind of in your corner?
Yeah, I mean, my family, that's key for me. Like whenever it comes to anything with business, I just call my dad, and sometimes it's just to vent. But he always has to play devil's advocate, and he's really good at that. Where he has always challenged me since I was young. I would have a business idea, and he would just tell me everything that possibly is wrong with it. But that debate would allow me to know if it really is an idea I'm passionate about and figure out the possible pitfalls ahead of time. We actually went to investing course in 2019 together, and we worked on a team for this like little competition that they had. And we played that role where I like gave the whole presentation to the group about these stock that we wanted to invest in, this company we wanted to invest in, and he gave all the reasons why it wouldn't work out, so that then I can challenge and overcome them to convince people this is the company to pick. And so he's definitely someone that I call for anything, whether just to get some negative feedback, different opinions, or just to like run something by him. And then on the flip side, of course, my boyfriend is helpful for just listening and letting me vent of things that went on in my day. And then I saw a TikTok that was hilarious the other day, and it was a dog's, kind of the owner is saying, hey, like, you don't carry your weight around here. And the dog is saying, excuse me, you should be paying me a therapist salary. And I totally believe that. Like my dog is, I'll tell her things throughout the day, or just even looking at her like gets me back into the present moment because dogs are so present compared to humans. Like dogs don't think about their thoughts like we do, and so. I would definitely consider my dog a big part of my support system, as silly as it may sound.
I think it's clear from the support that you have where you've developed this growth mindset and this perspective of exploration. That really stands out from the people around you, right? We're the product of people we have around us, and I'm sure that can't be any more true.
Yeah, I mean, I think, when I learned about the concept of growth mindset, I was like, wait a second, like, I've been taking the flack from my dad on any idea I possibly had from a young age. And I think that definitely helped that then I can take rejection. I can take, I would do Shark Tank pitches to my parents all the time, and they would say no to all my ideas. And so learning that, feedback isn't bad thing. It's a good thing and it helps you grow. It definitely was something, subconsciously was instilled in me. And only now, as I learn about some of these things, I'm like, oh, that makes sense about why I've kind of always had that.
I'm always fascinated by how high performers and people who really pursue mastery in different domains kind of stumble across these sports psychology or academically informed concepts almost just by trial and error. And then it's so frequent that they find out about it at a later date, either from a professional or from their own self study, and they start to connect the dots. I think that only backs up the science behind it, which is that the best in the world are using this stuff.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like even like you said, I referred to Atomic Habits a lot, but it's funny because when I read it, I was like, this all makes sense because these are things that I do. And I like that with books. I like to see books that challenge my beliefs entirely and make me do some things differently. But it is cool whenever you've kind of always believed something or done something naturally, and all of a sudden you see the science behind it or the explanation, and you're like, oh, that is really interesting. And it it almost it puts me at a detriment when people do ask me like, where did this come from? Like, how do you learn it? And it's hard for me to answer because I'm like, well, I think it was because my parents did this. And so it's always been like that. Versus if I would have just read it and said, hey, read this and do this. But it is really cool to kind of put those pieces together as you start learning and reading more.
Hey, Natalie, I've taken up way too much of your time here. I'm so thankful for all your insights. This has been such an engaging conversation. Do you have a number one takeaway for us or a final piece of advice you want to offer?
Yeah, I mean, I probably sound like a broken record, but I said like presence, and I think presence is important. I saw a quote recently about like don't measure your days in form of productivity, measure your days in form of presence, and I really, really enjoy that. Like I'm a big believer of we're human beings, not human doings, and so trying to focus on that first is only going to be beneficial to everything that then you do.
I love hearing those common threads throughout the conversation. I think they just really reinforce a lot of the learnings and a lot of your insights along the way.
Yeah, most of these things I had to learn the hard way, so hopefully you can help people avoid some of those pitfalls.
So, where can people connect with you if they're an athlete or an organization that wants to work with you, if they want to follow your journey in athletics, in coaching, in entrepreneurship? Where can they follow along? Where can they get involved?
Yeah, you can head to natalieallport.com or at Natalie Allport on pretty much all social media channels.
Classic. Natalie, again, thank you for your time. So this has been such a great conversation. I've been
Yeah, thank you for having me.
yeah, it's been an honor to chat to you about this stuff, and I hope that I hope our audience gets as many insights from it as I have personally.
Yeah, I love chatting about mindset, so appreciate you having me on.
Thank you for joining me for that conversation with Natalie Allport. I really appreciated how Natalie offered practical strategies based on decades of experience as an athlete, a coach, and an entrepreneur. As always, if you enjoyed this content and want to see more like it, then please take the time to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like down below. I'm Andrei Mandzuk, and you've been watching Mountain Mindset. Until next time.